begin tonight's program with the mayoral proclamation, and please welcome Alderman Brian McCarthy.
Thank you. The mayor is unable to attend this evening and asked me to read a proclamation on her behalf. Recognition, Holocaust Memorial Observance Day 2012, Choosing to Act, Stories of Rescue. Considering that nearly 79 years ago marks the beginning of the Holocaust as a period of time in our world history that was a state-sponsored, systematic persecution and execution of many European Jews by Nazi Germany and their collaborators, in part due to the economic strains of the Great Depression. And considering that for survivors and their families, the Holocaust remains real and ever present in their lives, but for those not affected as personally or of newer generations, 70+ years makes the Holocaust seem part of ancient history. And considering that when most people think of the Holocaust, they think mainly of the millions of Jews who fell victim. However, millions of others were killed by the Nazis in concentration and death camps. Gypsies, homosexuals, political prisoners, criminals, non-whites, and prisoners of war with a death toll of 20 million. And considering that people of all faiths and ethnicity who value humanity should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny, and live as ambassadors of respect for all mankind. And considering that Holocaust Memorial Observance Day gives us all an opportunity to actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom and to remember the sacrifice of life that was forced upon our many ancestors. Now, accordingly, I, Donnelly Lozo, Mayor of the City of Nashua, New Hampshire, do hereby recognize Wednesday, April 18th, 2012 as Holocaust Memorial Day, in memory of the victims of the Holocaust and in honor of the survivors, the rescuers, and liberators, and those who promised to tell the story and to never forget. Thank you.
Okay, now we will have Sister Paula Lee, the president of Riviera College, come and talk.
Dear friends, good evening, and welcome to Riviera College. As we once again, as a nation and a community, join together in observance of Holocaust Remembrance Day. It is truly a time of remembrance of the unspeakable evil that entered into the 20th century, a time when hatred, bigotry, intolerance, untold violence, death, and destruction were inflicted upon our Jewish brothers and sisters. Though some spoke, silence abounded. Though some protested, collusion proliferated. This evening, we remember so that our children and generations to come will never forget. We mourn the sins of the past, knowing these shameful crimes as a stain on humanity itself. It is a privilege for us to join with Temple Beth Abraham and Rabbi Jonathan and his congregation in presenting Dr. Lawrence Siegel, who has so poignantly elevated the art of musical composition in order to engage the depth of our spirits so that we may better repair the world. Our welcome and our thanks extends to the Holocaust Remembrance Committee and the sponsorship of the New Hampshire Humanities Council. This evening, that remarkable individual, Elie Wiesel, reminds us, music does not replace words, it gives tone to words. And so for all who join us this evening, Shalom.
And now we're going to have Fred T. Boom speak for a few minutes about the Holocaust Memorial in Nashua.
I am a Holocaust survivor. I knew the real Nazis. I survived as a hidden child. My father, mother, brother, and I survived. Our survival was nothing short of a miracle, because over 100 members of our extended family were murdered in Auschwitz. We were saved by very devout Christians who risked their lives each and every day to save ours. Look at the photographs around this room. Guided by God, I am committed to create a memorial made of stone so that succeeding generations will never forget the Nazi evil. John Wyman, a world-renowned sculptor, is now building his memorial. Please stand up, John. We designed this memorial to last longer than the Egyptian pyramids. The pyramids were made of sandstone, but ours is made of granite. Books will crumble to ashes, and computers will turn to rust. But this stone memorial will survive through the ages. You can see the design in our skill maquette, which we brought with us outside the room. We expect to complete this memorial next year and hope you will contribute to its construction. Now, this memorial is not just to be looked at, but to be experienced. While visiting this memorial, you will gain a life experience that you will never forget. You will experience the crematoria, feel the confinement, and see the rail stock that carried millions from their homes directly to their deaths. The memorial contains 6 massive granite walls surrounding a central pedestal. Each of the 6 granite walls names one of the death camps, which were intentionally designed by the Nazis to exterminate an entire ethnic race, ethnic people. Combined, 3 million Jews were mass murdered in these 6 extermination camps. The bricks of the center pedestal represent the crematoria. A polished black cube on top of the pedestal represents this darkest period in human history. In the black cube, you will recognize the ashes of human bodies burned in a crematorium, together with your own reflection, to remind you that in another time and place, you could have been murdered in an extermination camp. The spacing between the walls, the open sky above, symbolizes that while a human body can be imprisoned, tortured, and killed, the human soul remains free. I shall now conclude by naming each of the 6 extermination camps. Same as these names will be forever carved into the granite walls of the memorial. As I mention each of these 6 names, I will ask you to shout out, never forget. Stand up and raise your fists if you will. Auschwitz, never forget. Sobibor, never forget. Treblinka, never forget. Belzec, never forget. Chelmno, never forget. And Majdanek, never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred, for sharing your vision for this memorial and also sharing a little of your family history. I know that's not easy to do. So good evening. I'm Cheryl Rich Kern, Chair of the Holocaust Remembrance Day Committee, and I'd like to begin by thanking Riviera College for hosting this observance of Holocaust Remembrance Day, or as we say in Hebrew, Yom HaShoah. Riviera College and Temple Beth Abraham have collaborated for the last, and I'm not even exactly sure whether it's 15 years or 16 or so, for a long time to put on this event. And our working relationship demonstrates how people from different faiths and backgrounds can and must come together to honor the memories of those who perished during the Nazis' rise to power. Now, over the years, this committee has brought to Nashua a variety of speakers. We've had Holocaust survivors, dancers, painters, authors. So it's not unusual for us to engage art as a means to understand and heal from past tragedies, and tonight is no exception. Our speaker this evening is music composer and theater artist Lawrence Siegel. He has a PhD in music theory and composition from Brandeis University. He first came to New Hampshire as a fellow at the MacDowell Colony and has since made the Granite State his home. Larry, as his friends call him, has spent his career creating works that feature oral histories. In the 90s, with funds from the New Hampshire Council for the Arts, he developed a folk opera that celebrated life in New Hampshire. And since then, he's gone on to develop more than 25 musical theater pieces with verbatim text. Tonight, we'll see short selections from the musical performance called Kaddish. He'll discuss how he incorporated personal statements from his interviews with Holocaust survivors. Please welcome Lawrence Siegel.
Good evening. I'm grateful to be here to speak to you on Yom HaShoah. Remembrance of the Holocaust is an entirely apt and appropriate starting point for listening to a piece of music about the Holocaust. There's an important distinction that will be the main kind of through line, I think, of the talk I'm about to give you. Being a distinction between memory and history. History you see around you in these photographs. You find it in the facts about the Holocaust. You find it in the photographs which document actual events. Memory is what happens in people's lives, in people's minds and hearts as they experience the historical facts. And it's the memories of Fred, of survivors, that I didn't get a chance to interview Fred. Perhaps we'll talk later, but I did interview about 16 survivors of the Holocaust. And those texts were the basis for Kaddish, the Holocaust oratorio that you will hear some selections for. So this is a work of memory, and I'll come back to that point as I tell you some stories about the making of the piece and play you some selections. May I ask, besides Fred, are there Holocaust survivors here tonight? Hello. I'm honored that you're here. I'm honored that you're here. I got a chance to, I had my own family come from Central Europe before the Holocaust, but that's almost, in my feeling, like the beginning of the Holocaust, because pogroms that were happening in Central Europe were happening for hundreds of years before the actual Holocaust, which kind of coalesced all of that hatred into state-sponsored hatred. Therefore, you know, though my own grandparents escaped from Lithuania before the Holocaust, it's entirely certain that whoever they left behind was impacted. And in those days, you know, minus email and most other forms of mail, it was very difficult really to know what became of people once you left, and you very often lost touch completely. I know my grandmother had a sister in Central Europe who did survive, but whoever we don't know about presumably didn't. So all of us have been in one way or another impacted and survivors of the Holocaust. I began my own journey into that room. There's a sort of a description that some say about the Holocaust. It's a room that once you get into it, you don't get out. And I began my own journey into that room at a friend's birthday party, where I suggested to a woman I knew that I would like to write a piece about the 20th century Jewish experience. She was prominent in the board of the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College, and she said, "We have our 25th anniversary coming up. Why don't we commission this piece?" And we were off to the races. That's that's the short version of how it began. I had already had this background, as Cheryl mentioned, in interviewing people and using those texts to create work. So it was a natural synthesis of those two experiences for me to go talk to survivors and take their stories, their memories, and create a narrative of the Holocaust. As I began, one of the main things I had to wrestle with a lot was, how are you going to create a work of art that won't be unremittingly a downer, basically? And of course, you know, why wouldn't it be a downer in the first place? That's one of the points you might take as your starting point. But those, I will come back to that very question. I'll leave it actually as a question for the moment. Why not make it a downer? So let me just say that as I began, I thought about how to shape the piece and came up with a kind of a chronological standpoint, which would begin with life before the Holocaust and then express a few from the 6 million or more stories that I could have told about the Holocaust, and then try to wrestle with life since the Holocaust for the survivors. So perhaps as a starting point, let me play you the first selection that I'll play. Most of these will be on CD, on compact disc, music only. And then at the end, I will play you something on a DVD that will show you a survivor experiencing the piece herself. manage our own little sound system here. I think I've still got about the same level. Yeah. Okay. Though it's a work of memory, there's quite a bit of historical detail in that piece. I hope you could hear the words. I hope. It's a compilation of a bunch of interviews, and you can hear the story of someone who had a very nice life. You can also immediately juxtapose to that hear the story of someone who was very poor and lived in this rural area, whereas the one who had a nice life, she actually lived in a pretty major urban area. Her father was a businessman. The thing she was missing was cherries in the winter, which of course nowadays you can get pretty easily. And then further on in the piece you hear a vignette about someone who, when it was time to pray, would stop the wagon, get off, and say the Shema Yisrael, facing east towards Jerusalem. And you get there the sense of the kind of the cadence of life for certainly the religious Jews. There were also secular Jews living among them, but by and large, most were religious in those days and were certainly living their lives in accordance with the cadence of religious life. So this is a vignette from the beginning of Kaddish about life before the Holocaust. There are other vignettes in that same section that talk about the importance of learning. Jews know themselves as the people of the book. And one of the interesting things that happened for me in hearing people's stories was, and I'll come back to this point too, how many people from this common cultural background had very, very similar things to say about things like education, and in remarkably similar ways. Example, talking about education, more than one survivor told me a vignette in which their father would come to them and say, I need you to have an education because what goes into your head, no one can take it away from you. Everything else can be taken away from you, but what goes into your head, you will always have. And so this somehow emblemized the significance of education. Now again, this is portrayed through a work of music, a work of art. It's a memory, and yet there's content in it that relates to, that you can get a pretty clear picture of life, in this case before the Holocaust. I'll play you one more selection from Life Before the Holocaust, which addresses the pervasive anti-Semitism that existed well before Hitler came.
hate me till Tuesday. And Tuesday they would again become my friends.
Often you saw, and I saw it with my own eyes, that some young Polish guys would catch a Jew who had a beard and was dressed in a religious outfit. They would just beat him in the street, and you often heard mothers telling their children, when we were on a train and some family was sitting next to us, we heard this. A mother to say to the children,
I'm kind of fond of that movement for a few reasons. One is using humor to tell a story that's not funny. But, you know, it's funny. It also, I think, captures, you know, in a particular way. You know, it's one thing to say there was anti-Semitism before, you know, that it was pervasive. It's another thing to hear a story of people saying, you know, eat or the Jew will get you, you know, and to imagine the Jew as the boogeyman is kind of a shock for me, I must say. You know, to hear that kind of personalization of the detail is, to those of us who haven't experienced it directly, strong stuff. Also the notion of the child who, you know, is a good soccer player, so he's got friends and they all play together, but on Sunday they heard what was, and I suppose in some places still is, the received doctrine that the Jews were responsible for the murder of Christ, and therefore, after hearing this on Sunday, they went out and beat him up. And a couple days later, like, you know, we still need to play soccer together. And there's something about that kind of nexus of experience that's both troubling and hopeful in a certain way. I mean, it suggests people's ability to grow and change and arrive at something different. And when you were speaking, I think, of repair of the world in your opening remarks, I thought of this story, which really suggests, and the way that this community shares this experience together suggests, you know, the capacity of human beings to learn things. Sometimes, you know, it takes a lot of information to learn, but there is that capacity, and it's a source of, it should be, I think, a source of hope. So before I come back to hope, I'll play you one selection from the Holocaust section of the piece. It's a very difficult story. It's called My Daughter's Name is Raisha. The man who told me this story told me, he started to tell the story. He said, I had a sister whose name was Raisha, and my daughter's name is Raisha. And the minute he said that, you know, my hair stood up, because I knew that a Jew will never name, someone after someone who's alive. So clearly, his sister had died, and since we were talking about Holocaust, he was going to tell me a story of how she died in the Holocaust. I'll play you that story, and it's a terrible story. And what? It's a terrible story.
A German officer came, he tore her away from my mother, and he pushed her to the left side of the field. My mother said to my father, we need to go with Asia. I started crying that I don't want to go to that side, that I want to live, that I want my parents with me. And my parents stayed with me, my little sister. Went to the left side of the field. I've asked myself many times, I have many times, strong feelings about it, thinking that I took my parents away from my little sister. To see my parents' faces when they watched my little sister being killed. And it's becoming kind of more lingering as I get older. I keep on thinking of myself, what would I do if these were my children? I had a little sister, 5 years younger than myself. Her name was Rachel. My daughter's name is Rachel.
So I think that, again, in that piece, it brings home in a very personal way things that, you know, when you hear 6 million, well, that's a lot of people. You know, it's overwhelming and not really particular. But when you hear about, you know, one person and the way she died, and even more than that, the experience of those who survived, you know, I think that's really, you know, what art can do in a certain way that's even just saying it is harder. It's harder to achieve that same visceral experience, and from that visceral experience, one would hope to become energized and engaged in the work of not forgetting, of never forgetting. You hear the term survivor guilt, you know, and it's generally a term, and it comes with sort of a phrase like, how comes I survived when others didn't? I think that Walter, who told me this story, has a very particular kind of guilt, which you hear him share in the piece, you know, that I asked my parents to stay with me, which, you know, he's a little boy. He asked his parents to stay with him. And it's extremely powerful to imagine this, what he's had to live with. What difference would it have made if they would have died earlier if they had gone with Raisha? Certainly would not have survived, you know, would not have caused Raisha to survive, nor them. But, you know, that I think is the most damning indictment of the Nazis for, you know, leaving the survivors with that kind of experience. Nevertheless, many survivors have gone on and have not only survived, but have in fact had families. You know, it was really, I think, one of the remarkable imperatives of those who survived to right away, really very quickly find new partners, new spouses. Many had, you know, had partners who had not survived, and they very quickly went and found partners and started new families and brought, you know, the Jewish people back from the edge of annihilation. And that story ultimately is the one that, as told to me by Naomi Warren, who you will shortly see tell it, that story was what enabled me to provide a happy ending to this piece. And in a, you know, I'll before I play you that, I'll sort of conclude my conversational part of this, and then play that, and then take your questions. I was charged, you know, when I was commissioned to do the piece, with finding some hope. I said, you know, this is going to be verbatim. If people don't tell me anything hopeful, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to pretend. And I didn't know much about the Holocaust or about survivors at that time, so I was fully prepared to not be able to provide them with any hope. But after hearing a few stories of admittedly people who had, you know, had gone on to have successful lives, it became clear that there was something in them that had managed to thrive and to find a resilience. And I believe I see it in Fred and in his vigor and in his energy that he brings to what he's trying to do, even if that what he's trying to do is enshrine the notion of never forget. But it's a never forget with, you know, within a community, of a living community that will take the messages to heart and go forward. I think that part of the thing that, or maybe even almost all of the thing that has made this possible, is time. And I think that there has, you know, really actually been a kind of a sea change over the now 70 years and growing since the actual events of the Holocaust. That in the first decades, there was more stunned silence. There was nothing to be said. And what people said was, there's nothing to be said. That's what people said. And nobody wanted to tell their children, and nobody wanted to, they wanted to prevent anyone from really, and also there was shock. How did we let this happen? There was some of that, you know, and on the part of the Jews who founded the state of Israel, who were, you know, in large part the resistance fighters and the people who in many cases, you know, had fought back in whatever ways they could. There was a bit of, I feel confident in saying this because I heard Israelis saying this to me. There was a bit of, how did you let this happen? There are many stories about how it came to pass, and this is not my job. That's an act of history to explain how it came to pass. But you can even hear it in the story of Rasha, for example. What am I doing when you have my daughter? What is there for me to do? One more point before I begin to play you the material. There's a reason that's in keeping with this experience that Yom HaShoah is April 19th, tomorrow. And that reason is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. That's the reason that Yom HaShoah was chosen. Okay, as opposed to the days of the, you know, liberation of Auschwitz or Buchenwald. I mean, and so it's a day chosen in a way to symbolize resistance and also resilience. In any event, this piece that I wrote, you know, starts with life before the Holocaust, proceeds through a series of vignettes, kind of like the one you just heard, and then wrestles with this question of hope. And the pivoting point is something a little bit like your memorial, sir. It's a little bit like having to do with those 6 death camps. What it is a piece I call Litany, and it takes the names, the date of birth, the name, the place of death of a number of the perished. My research assistant helped me by going into the Yad Vashem database. Yad Vashem is the Israeli People's Memorial to the Holocaust. She came up with 2,000 plus names. She had a real hard time coming up with those simple pieces of information because so badly were people's memories erased that you couldn't even find, you know, you could find a name but don't know when they were born or don't know when they wound up in Auschwitz or Majdanek and don't know when they died. So, but there you have 2,000 names and that information, place of birth, date of death, place of death. So of course what you find is people who came from Greece, from Hungary, from Germany, you know, and they were funneled by cattle car to 6 places. And so at the end of each of these lists you have that name, Auschwitz, Majdanek, etc. And now if we can perhaps have the lights. Let's see if we can get the video going. Let's see, I have to turn on a few things. This thing I have to do, yep, that's promising. And then I have to do, it's going to warm up probably. I'm going to do this thing. No, we're not going to do that thing.
Elizabeth Auster, born 1909, Lwów, Poland, died 1942, Belzec.
Perhaps the most chilling passage is the simplest.
Born 1880, Jezerjani, Poland, died 1942, Belzec.
The recitation of the names and dates of birth and death of 2,000 among the millions who perished in the Holocaust.
Born 1937, Rotterdam, Netherlands. Died 1943, Auschwitz.
We light this candle in memory of 6 million Jews, countless other victims deemed unworthy of life by their Nazi persecutors, and especially this night for Tom Lantos, friend to the Cohen Center, advisor to the Kaddish Project, and one for whom this candle's flame was intensely personal.
Tom Lantos was the only Holocaust survivor to be elected to the U.S. Congress. He died in February 2008. His wife Annette and daughter Katrina Sweat attended the premiere.
His last public outing was here at Kristallnacht in Keene. And he, in the last few months of his life, repeatedly talked about this experience more than anything else. He had leaders from all over the world come and visit him on his deathbed, and the conversation always turned to what he experienced here in Keene. I think he sensed the spirit, not just for the Jewish community, this is for all communities, and I think that's going to make a very, very, very powerful statement as it travels around the world.
And Katrina feel him here today?
Yes.
That theme, that genocide is a universal concern, is echoed in Kaddish prayer.
I think it's important to find every way possible to help people recognize that this happened and is still happening. Genocide is still going on today, obviously, in places like Darfur. And the role of a work of art, the role of Kaddish, I think, in this case, is to inspire people to feel empathy for the survivors, for those also who perished, to feel viscerally what they experienced. And my hope would be that they will then, our audience that is, will then come out of a performance determined in an almost physical way to lend their own weight to trying to prevent future genocides.
It was a lesson that not true forgotten. It took me more to hate than to love. I had to reach into my heart, my mind. I had a long life ahead of me. Nothing is as old as the heart which has been broken. All time is made up of healing of the world. Return to your ships, which are your broken bodies. Return to your ships, which shall be rebuilt.
Victory into your day-to-day living, into your life as it is here. All the things I witnessed, I'm blessed to be here. I'm very blessed with my
I want to just weep my eyeballs out. It's so moving, it's so emotional. It's been the most emotional last 2 weeks. And it's been the hardest piece I've ever had to sing because of that, because of the text. And so it's very demanding technically, vocally, as you can hear. So I had to concentrate on that, we all did. And then about last night, I started really listening. I was trying not to hear what we were saying.
Return to your ships, which are your broken bodies. Return to your ships, which have been rebuilt.
with survivor Naomi Warren's story of finding the courage to confront her past torment. Listen to her words become song.
All the way from Krakow to Auschwitz, I absolutely went. I could not figure out how I would respond to coming there. Survived, and look who is with me. You know, it was just such an incredible feeling that I said, I am victorious.
Seeing that on stage?
Well, I was overwhelmed and I was speechless and I just sat there and I was shaking. And so that's what I can say. It is just absolutely incredible. It's such a gem of creativity that Larry has presented to us.
How important do you think it is that you tell your stories, that people hear them?
I think it's very important that not I, but all the survivors should tell the stories, because we won't be here for a long time anymore. But our stories have to go on and on and on.
Kaddish is the Jewish prayer for the dead, but it is also a celebration of life and hope. And in that sense, the prayer and this music are the same.
Thank you. So, yeah, this question of we wouldn't be here for a long time anymore, I think is one of the important takeaways, if you will. The opportunity to speak to and hear the story of a survivor of the Holocaust. Forgive me if I keep looking at you, sir. This is a very closing window, and we should all, be, it should be very, very high on our priority list to do that, because once that is an opportunity is not there anymore, there's history, there are the facts, the photos, there's memory, there are the recordings, there are performances. There are educational materials, which it's all good. This is all good. But, to be in the presence of someone who has experienced that directly, there's nothing else. Nothing can match that for really getting going into that room. And in that room, there's important work to be done that all of us can be part of. So thank you for listening, and I'd be glad to take some questions. Thank you. Glad to answer some questions if I... Yes, sir.
I have a question. Just in terms of your creativity for this, how do you avoid falling into cliches, whether it's, you know, Fiddler on the Roof or whatever the cliches of modern discordant music are. How did you find some original way to tell something that people might have heard, or an idiom that fit the difference or the uniqueness of what you're talking about?
An interesting question. I appreciate that it doesn't sound like that to you, so thank you. I think in terms of text, very clearly the using people's real words has been a real gift for me to experience, and I've done this now for more than 20 years with different subjects. But so I feel that to take, you know, the actual testimonies of people, survivors in this case, and craft that into words that speak as lyrics is really gives me a huge leg up right away in terms of an original point of view for the piece. If the music doesn't sound cliche, well, thank you very much. I mean, you know, I've been at it a while and do my best, and you know, I don't sweat it too hard. If it comes out a little like Fiddler on the Roof, you know, that's a pretty nice piece. But I just, you know, I let the text, you know, inspire me, and I take the music from the text. Yes, sir.
It's not so much a question as a very quick comment. It seems that one of the major themes of most Jewish holidays is they tried to kill us, God saved us, let's eat. We celebrate that we have life and that God has saved us, Baruch Hashem. But that being said, we also need to be cognizant of the fact, and this is why what you're doing is so important, that there are forces and there are people, and they are very personal, who want to repeat history again, and that the threat is very real, and unless we put never again to boots, again, things of this nature that you're doing, projects, and bring it to the streets and talk to people and share with them and give them our heart and bring them into these things, it is not an impossible thought to consider that there would be someone who would rise up, another Haman, another Hitler, another Pharaoh, because history repeats itself. And we should always remember they tried to save us. They tried to kill us. God saved us. Let's eat.
Well, yes, I agree with that. Is there a reception? No, just kidding. I would say I appreciate you making that point, because one of the pieces of content that I had meant to mention to you was that Kaddish prayer, which, by the way, I set in the Ashkenazic setting with the S's at the end instead of the T's, in homage to the vanished life of Central Europe. But that Kaddish prayer does not have a sad word in it. It's entirely a celebration of life, Kaddish. It's a list of all the things we are grateful for. And it's, of course, always intoned in a rather mournful way, because people are sad when they're saying it, and they're saying it in homage to the perished. And it's set in the same way in my piece. My own musical setting of the words follows right upon that litany. You didn't get very much of the litany, by the way. If you hear it in its full, it's about 5 or 6 minutes long, and you know, I showed it to you on the video so you could get a little of the flavor of that performance. But in the video, you know, in the actual performance, and this is something any group can do, by the way, because it doesn't require reading music. You're just reading a list, you know, a page of names. But it begins with one person, one man, then 2 men, then 3 men. They overlap, then more, then more, then more. Then the women come in, then more, then more. There's a huge, busy. Then the men die away, and eventually just one woman whose last word is Auschwitz. And it's about 6 minutes long. It's you know, it's powerful to listen to. It's really powerful to participate in, and any group can do it. It's one of the main educational aspects that have come out of this piece, is the ability for you know, high school or middle-aged or certainly college age people to, participate in the piece itself. Anyway, that's going on and on. Any more questions? Yes.
I was really taken by the last line there that Naomi said, look who is with us.
Look who is with me. Yeah.
I don't know. What is that? What do you think that meant to her?
It means she's pointing to her children. She's pointing to her children. To me, I'm glad that you were taken with it. To me, that's the, that's the big message right there. I am here. I survived. That's one thing. Look who is with me is the hope. That's that's the future. And I mean that was very intentional on my part to make that the accent, the moment of arrival. Not I am here. Not even I survived, but look who's with me is the answer. Also, I would point out that when the chorus sings I am here, I'll just drop a name here. Jane Henson, who is Jim Henson's widow, the inspiration for Miss Piggy, is someone I know from some work that I've done at puppetry, at a puppetry conference. And I was telling her about this project when I was just starting to write it, and said it would be for chorus, and she said, chorus? That'll be like the company of souls singing back to us. And Jane is like this. She's a magic woman, and just threw me this idea. And indeed, the chorus is not meant to be the living. It's really meant to be the company of souls who are here, who are with us. One other name I'll drop in that context. There's a very erudite Holocaust scholar named Larry Langer, Lawrence Langer, from down around Boston area, teaches at Simmons. And he, as is Elie Wiesel and many, many others of the teachers, of the imparters of the Holocaust, is very much began their work really in the heyday of the idea that you oughtn't to really get anything positive in a way out of it. And yet Larry, I am honored to say, has responded very favorably to this piece, probably because it exemplified a concept that he came up with, which is what he calls death in life. So that the survivors, even Naomi, who has gone on to feel very proud of her family, are still carrying the Holocaust with them. They're still carrying the perished with them. And this piece means to do that. This does not mean to leave the perished behind. All right, I am here. It's not like that. It's more like, look who's with me. Not only my children, but who, those who aren't here. So, death in life, but life. Let's see.
Chopped liver, it's on me.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, ma'am.
I arrived a little late, so forgive me if you already announced this, but is there some plan to perform this complete piece in the near future in New Hampshire?
There was somebody, well, we shall see. I mean, there's no plan. No, there's no plan, but there's interest, and I certainly will respond to interest. It takes a bit of work to put it together. As 1 hour piece, it's got a chorus, it's got an orchestra, it's got 4 soloists. It's been done at UNH, it's been done at Keene, and it's a very good college piece for a project with a group that would have a chorus and It's been done by a couple of symphony orchestras, once in Houston Symphony, and once, I'm so proud to say, at Yad Vashem last September. It was done in the Warsaw Ghetto place, if anyone's ever been there, at Yad Vashem, the Jewish people's memorial to the Holocaust in Jerusalem. That was an amazing experience. And
Out of mailing these out to neo-Nazis?
no, I haven't. But I want to say one thing about deniers. There's a part in this piece that another of those things that a lot of people said to me, the interviewers, those who were in camps, they all referred to the selection platform. They all referred to 5 by 5. 5 by 5. If you listen to interviews, 5 by 5. We were marching 5 by 5. Not some said 6, not some said 2, you know. And these are people from, you know, from Massachusetts, from Houston, from, New York. I didn't go everywhere, but these were not people who talked about it in advance and said, let's say 5 by 5. So I always find it a sort of emblematic, a thing you could, if you ever wanted to, I mean, they wouldn't believe anything you said anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but if you ever wanted to, if you ever had any doubt, you know, to hear people from who never could have possibly known each other, who knew those details about what it was like on the selection platform. It underscores, again, in the way that a work of art can make things particular. I mean, I return to this point, that, you know, it's one thing to know the facts, it's another thing to experience these particular facts, you know, in oneself. It's really almost, it's a little closer to experiencing it, I think, and that's important. Anyhow, thank you so much. I appreciate being part of your experience.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Dr. Siegel, to Larry, for giving us another way of knowing what we know, what we've come here to know and to be a witness to, and something very different and something very much penetrating to our hearts. Before we begin our ceremony, I do want to say on behalf of the Jewish community a thank you as well to our hosts and our partners here at Riviera College. A thank you and a welcome to Sister Paula for being part of our community, and a special thank you to Brother Paul Demers. Where is Brother Paul? In the back, of course, as our organizer, who has been the organizer and who has been the embodiment of the commitment of this college and this community to remembering and to being here and standing with us. And I want to also say thank you again to Cheryl Rich-Kern, who has been the creative force and the dedicated passion in the community for making sure that we have this year after year. Ad matai rishaim Adonai, ad matai rishaim ya'alozu, Yabiu yedabru atak, yitamru kol po'alei aven. Amcha Adonai yedak'u, v'nachalatcha ye'anu. Almana v'ger yaharogu, v'tomim yiratzechu. Vayomru lo yir'eh ya, v'lo yavin Elohei Yaakov. Binu bo'arim ba'am, uchsilim matai taskilu. Hanota ozen halo yishma. Im yotzer ayin halo yabit, hayoser goyim halo yochiach, hamalamed adam da'at. Until when shall the wicked, O Lord, until when shall the wicked exult? They utter and speak hard things, tell each other of evil doing. Your people, Lord, they break in pieces. Your heritage they make to suffer. The widow and stranger they kill. The orphan they murder, and they say, God does not see. The God of Jacob does not understand. But you understand, brutish people. Fools, you come to your senses. Does God shape the ear and not hear? design every eye but not see, chastise nations but not rebuke, this God who teaches humans awareness. Who will rise up for me against evildoers? Who will stand up for me against wrongdoers? If the Lord had not been my help, my soul would have almost been silenced. Shall the throne of iniquity bind to you, God, and make out of injustice the law? Shall they gather on the soul of the blameless and imprison innocent blood? But the Lord has become my stronghold. My God is my sheltering rock. We have been here in a way this whole evening has been a ceremony, a ritual, marking the memory of the Holocaust, and we're here in a couple of ways. One is all of us as brothers and sisters, children of God, bearing witness again to a crime against all of humanity, in a desecration of the name of the Holy One whom we all revere. Mourning we are for those who were murdered, and despondent that the human spirit could descend so low, and aching for those who survived and were broken, who lost their spirit or their faith or their God. And the other way we are here is as the family of Jews and our friends who are here to comfort us. We remember and mourn the Shoah, people we knew, members of our own families, 6 million Jews. Nearly 70 years after the end, we have denied Hitler his posthumous victory. Jews live free and proud in the land of Israel, in America, in other lands. This incredible flowering of Torah and Jewish creativity and culture the world over. The breaking down of so many walls of anti-Semitism. And still we, the Jewish people, are not healed, not yet. We still ask, why us? And we dedicate ourselves not to forget and to see our image in all who are hated and marginalized and brutalized, whoever they are, and we stand by them. And still we mourn, and still we fear. And so we huddle together, everywhere, Jews gather tonight and tomorrow on Yom HaShoah. To those, to you, who have come to be with us, to be with the Jews in our sorrow, thank you. Thank you for comforting us. Thank you for helping us know that we are not alone, that we may feel vulnerable in this world, but we are not powerless, and we are not friendless anymore. We call up here to the platform, to our bima, to our holy raised place, 6 people representing the community, our whole community, and every aspect of our memory of the Shoah, people who are survivors and families of survivors, people who lost loved ones, and members of our present and of our future, students and leaders from the Jewish community and the wider community, to be here in sacred memory for those who perished in the Shoah.
The symbolism of Yom HaShoah has become 6 candles for 6 million. While 1 million is huge and ungraspable by most, 1 is tenable. So with each candle lit, I'll offer a name and a mini bio of 6 victims of the Shoah. As we light the first candle, we also remember Zenia Bakar, born in Bucharest in 1882. She was a housewife and married. Prior to World War II, she lived in Paris. During the war, she was in Paris. Zenia was murdered 1943 in Paris. First candle.
As we light the second candle, we also remember Moshe Bernstein, born in Manchurovo in the Ukraine in 1910. He was married prior to World War II. He lived in the same place in the Ukraine and was murdered in the Shoah at the age of 31. As we light the third candle, we also remember Anna Koopman, born in Leiden in the Netherlands in 1917. During the war, she was in the Netherlands. Anna was murdered in 1943 at Sobibor. As we light the fourth candle, we also remember Solomon Schmidt, born in Tarnow, Poland in 1887. During the war, he was in the Netherlands. Solomon was murdered in 1943 at Sobibor. As we light the fifth candle, we also remember Elias Katz, born in Enschede in the Netherlands in 1910. Elias was murdered in 1943 in Warsaw at the age of 33. As we light the sixth candle, we also remember Sarah Friedman, born in Czechoslovakia in 1906. She was married to HaShoah. Prior to World War II, she remained in Czechoslovakia. She was also murdered there in the early 1940s. In their memory, Il Male Rachamim.
Please stand. El male rachamim shochen v'amromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina b'ma'alot kedoshim utehorim kezohar harakia mazhirim lenishmot kol eile shehizkarnu hayom livracha shenehergu v'shenisrefu Shenehergu al kiddush Hashem began Eden tehe menuchatam Ana bal harachamim Hastirehem beseter kanafecha leolamim Utziror bitzror chayim et nishmotehem Adonai hu nachalatam V'yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavotehem V'nomar Amen.
We continue with the Kaddish responsively on the third page of the program. Yit Gadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yit Kadash,
Lodz,
Shmei Rabbah,
Honar,
B'alma divrach iritei,
Babiyar,
V'yamliach malchutei,
Maidanek,
B'chayechon v'yomechon,
Bir Kanau,
V'chayedechol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
B'agalav Izman Kariv,
Yanovska,
V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavarach La'alam L'amei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach,
Theresienstadt,
v'yitpar v'yitromam,
Buchenwald,
v'yitnaseh v'yitadar,
Treblinka,
v'yitalev v'yitalal,
Vilna,
Shmei Dekudsha,
Bergen-Belsen,
Baruchu, La'ela,
Mauthausen,
Min kol berchata v'shirata,
Dachau,
Tushbechata v'nechamata,
Minsk,
Da miran balma,
Warsaw,
v'imru Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim, Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu val kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. We conclude with Hatikva. Kol od balevav pneima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulefateh mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvateinu hatikva bat shnot alpayim liotam choshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim.